Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. Now, I'm very excited about our guest today. When I was a young child in the 1970s, which is far too long ago for what I care to imagine, one of the most enthralling acts on TV and on the stage wasn't a musician, it wasn't an artist. It was an Israeli-British man called Uri Geller, who claimed to have psychic abilities. And he enthralled audiences around the world with his seeming ability to apparently bend spoons and stop clocks with his mind. He demonstrated what were apparently astonishing feats of telepathy, finding hidden objects, remote viewing images, skills of dowsing and telepathy. But Uri has also long been attacked by debunkers and skeptics as a charlatan and a fraud because he claims these psychic powers. And much of the official mainstream media coverage of his career pejoratively dismisses him as an illusionist, a magician, an entertainer who supposedly uses trickery to deceive his audience into believing what he's doing is real. Uri, though, has suggested that the paranormal skills he claims to have may indeed have been bestowed on him, perhaps even by an extraterrestrial intelligence. And that's something we'll ask him about today. And of course, such claims just infuriate the splenetic blood debunkers. There's a skeptic called James Randi who became the eminence grise of Uri. He went to great efforts to try to prove that Uri's alleged tricks could be replicated with stage magic, simple sleight of hand. Now, I would say it's still very much an open question whether and how Uri Geller is psychic, how he does what he does. And that's because 7 years ago, in 2017, declassified documents from the CIA showed that Uri Geller did convince America's top intelligence agency in scientific testing that he really did have psychic abilities. This secret project, codenamed the Stargate project, made the official finding, quote, "As a result of Geller's success in this experimental period, we consider that he has demonstrated his paranormal perceptual ability in a convincing and unambiguous manner." The CIA's documents also show that Uri went on to work with the agency, helping it study his purported psychic powers, and in fact, he was deployed on operations. They took him very, very seriously indeed, despite what the skeptics say. Uri will turn 78 in December, but he has very graciously and kindly agreed to speak to us today from his home in Israel. But first, a wee plug for one of our sponsors. So we're talking again this week through our sponsor about the horrors of what happens to your body when you eat the ultra-processed food that passes for grub in America. And it turns out the key to losing weight and keeping it off is not in carbs or fat or even in probiotic-rich foods. No, the end game of having a healthy weight as well as more energy and a long, healthy life comes down to a specific switch you can flip in your body to flush out unnecessary calories. Dr. Stephen Gundry is calling this caloric bypass. And by activating this specific process in your body, he has seen thousands, yes, thousands of people dramatically improve their health, even at age 50 and beyond. This includes losing weight, getting tons more energy, and returning to the good health they had in their youth once they simply addressed this one key to better health. And not only is this associated with improved digestion, strong feeling joints and muscles, smoother skin and healthier lives, it could also be the key to a healthier life. Dr. Stephen Gundry's lost 70 pounds himself using his research and has kept the weight off for over 20 years and counting. His digestive issues are gone, his health is fantastic, and he feels younger and healthier today than he did in his 40s. His video has been watched by over 20 million people to date, and you can watch and learn more about it at thehealthyfat.com/Ross. I'll say that again, thehealthyfat.com/Ross. It's linked at the bottom of this video, but he'll teach you exactly how he's kept his weight off for free at thehealthyfat.com/Ross. And you can click in the description below. Now, let's introduce our guest, Uri Geller. Firstly, can I say, sir, welcome to Reality Check. It's an honor to have you with us.
Hey, Ross, thanks very much for having me on your news show. And I'm speaking from the Holy Land, Israel. I'm sitting in my museum. I do not live in the museum. And it's great to speak with you. Thanks for the incredible monologue. You should become my agent.
Let's roll back, Uri, to August 1973, which is 51 years ago this month. You were at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, in California doing experiments with Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, where they were scientifically attempting to verify your paranormal perception abilities. And they did this under controlled scientific conditions. Do you recall those days?
Oh, absolutely. But I do have to backtrack a little back to Israel. You see, Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, was very interested in my abilities, and they wanted to test me. But we're speaking about 1969. Mossad did not have the tools to test my brain. We're going back so many years. No tools to test Uri Geller. So what do? They call up the CIA and they ask for help. CIA is, wow, we definitely want to test Uri Geller. Let's get into America. Let's get into Stanford in Palo Alto. But they send a guy called Andrei Puharich to Israel to test me first, who was a medical doctor and quite a well-known scientist with ties to the CIA. And then I get a phone call and a letter from Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, the sixth man to walk on the moon. So that's how it developed towards Stanford Research Institute. And yeah, I do remember those days. They were very painful. I had to go through a battery of scientifically, controlled experiments, locked in shielded rooms, cameras filming me. You see, one of the experimenter beside Hal Puthoff was Russell Targ, who was actually an amateur magician. But we'll speak. Actually, let me show you this photograph. This is look. This is an amazing photo. This is Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, and this is them 51 years later. Incredible. Thanks. I thank my brother-in-law for bringing that, because in my museum I have all these incredible displays. Anyhow, I had to prove myself because I was already becoming controversial. I was already a controversial figure in Israel, but I realized that Ross, controversy was good for me. No matter what they said, as long as they spell my name correctly, was always fantastic. So I had to go through these tests. But what you have seen, the video that SRI released, or in the documents that were released to publication, that's, believe it or not, is a tiny piece, a tiny little experiment that they allowed to show. You have no idea, and I can't go there, but what else I've done there for the CIA. Unbelievable. Nevertheless, I do remember those days. Incredible. The scientists, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, were really nice. Everything was, as I said, under control conditions. And then they had to admit that it's real, because it is real, Ross.
Did it feel like a vindication for you, Uri? I mean, you've spent a large part of your career being slagged off, frankly, as a charlatan and a fraud. And I'm not in a position to be able to make a judgment, but I know Hal Puthoff, Dr. Hal Puthoff, very well. I know Hal would never falsify data, neither would Russell Targ. And I can tell the audience how seriously SRI took this research, and that's revealed in the CIA documents that were declassified. they put you into an electronically shielded, isolated room, didn't they? It was essentially a Faraday cage. So there was no possibility of you being able to communicate with the outside.
Absolutely. You're right, Ross. Um, you could not. This was such tight control conditions. There is no way that someone could cheat or I mean, the things that they said about the shielded room were unbelievable. They even accused me. I think I have it here. They even accused me of having a transmitter up my tooth. Believe it or not. Wait a minute. Let me show it to you. By the way, I did not prepare all this. They are all around the area because this is my CIA Mossad area. Look, they claimed, and this comes from a very prestigious magazine called New Scientist. They claimed that I had a transmitter up my tooth and somebody was Morse coding me outside the shielded room. There was nobody from anyone from my team outside the shielded room. How ridiculous. I mean, if I really had, Ross, a transmitter up my tooth, it would be a bigger phenomenon than bending spoons with the power of the mind. Okay. So, so,
But
um,
one thing I do want to address, and we have to deal with this because I think it's important to give you the opportunity to respond to these claims. There was actually an article published in the very prestigious scientific journal Nature where two psychologists, one called Marks and another called Kamen, they flatly made an allegation that took me by surprise because I know how Hal operates. There's no way he or Russell Targ would have tolerated this. But the claim was that you were allowed to peek through a hole in the laboratory wall separating you from the drawings you were being invited to reproduce. And that these drawings were supposedly placed on a wall opposite the peephole that the investigators Targ and Puthoff had stuffed with cotton gauze. And when anybody watches the video, it's quite clear that what Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were using was a controlled blind test. These images that you were remote viewing were actually in sealed, double sealed envelopes, weren't they?
yes, absolutely. This thing with the hole that you're talking about, Ross. I mean, you're talking to Superman, if so, or Flash Gordon, or Daredevil. If I had holes there, how did anyhow? Nonsense. I did it purely. Call it telepathy. Call it remote viewing. Call it whatever you want to call it. I sat in that shielded room and I duplicated the drawings. Some of them were so precise, Ross, like the bunch of grapes, 24 grapes. They drew 24 grapes. I got 24 grapes. Some of my
No,
drawings, yeah,
I don't want to be too brief with this because I think the grapes one is actually a very good example. So let's just go through this. They got a person to draw an image, a black and white image of, as kind of a skeleton image of a bunch of grapes. And there were 24 grapes in a particular configuration, in a particular shape. And what I found fascinating was that you actually got not only the shape, but the number of grapes.
yeah, well, I don't know how I did that, but I drew 24 grapes. I had no idea that their, bunch of grapes also had 24. This is just one set of experiments. Then there were many others conducted with a computer. So, for instance, the scientists themselves did not know, to the best of my recollection, what the computer chose to draw. So, in one experiment, the computer drew a kite, a kite with a tail and the ribbons. And I drew a kite, and this is coming from the mind of a computer. So apparently, whether it's remote viewing or telepathy or another strange, mysterious ability that we all have, probably, I managed to extract the kite out of a computer with no human being uh, around. The experimenter knows that the computer chose to draw a drawing of a kite.
I think what disturbs me as a journalist, Uri, is I don't know one way or the other about your skill set. But what I do find alarming is the dishonesty that has been referenced in some mainstream media reporting of your alleged skills, because there's been a flagrant misrepresentation of the SRI work. It was done with incredibly rigorous scientific controlled blind standards, wasn't it?
Of course, very much so. And otherwise, the CIA would have not published this. And then, Nature magazine wouldn't have touched it. Nature is one of the most prestigious scientific magazine in the world. But look,
But but
listen,
na-
Ross,
but
hold on.
nature, of course, was having a go at you because the two psychologists who wrote the piece for
Yeah,
Nature were suggesting it
give me
was
that.
bunkum. But
Well, let me
what
show
I
you.
can tell,
Hold on, Ross,
yeah,
because
can I just want to draw you on something that the CIA made the finding that they considered you had demonstrated your paranormal perceptual ability in a convincing and unambiguous manner. And I think one of the things that you were doing that I found particularly impressive was when you were projecting or appearing to project a number into the mind of a human subject, and then they were writing it down, or the other way around. Can you just describe what you were being asked to do?
okay, since Ross, you can edit the show any way you want, let me just show you. This is also around me. Nature magazine, New Scientist, and New Scientist. So you must understand that when these publications come out with scientific articles, whether they're for Uri Geller or New Scientists who try to debunk Uri Geller, it's still unbelievably amazing. Now, to be able to transmit a thought into someone's mind, I believe is the same power, it's the same energy. Once again, maybe it is remote viewing, maybe it is telepathy. But the most successful one that I did with telepathy was when Kit Green, you know Kit Green, don't you?
I do. Yeah.
So Kit Green was sitting, I believe, in Langley, Virginia, and I
He was the
was.
head of, I think he was the head at the time of the Department or the Directorate of Science and Technology in the CIA. So he was kind of like the chief scientist for the CIA at the time.
Yes, and this is hundreds, not thousands of miles or kilometers away from Palo Alto. So he didn't quite believe in my abilities. And Hal Puthoff put him on the line. And Kid Green says to me, "Look, Uri, what can you do? Can you show me something?" And I just, we're talking about 51 years ago. There's no iPhone, there is no FaceTime, this is an old fashioned black phone. And I basically, he was holding a drawing, and I described the drawing. And above the drawing, in my own mind, I saw the word architecture. And that's exactly what Kid Green wrote on that page inside the book. It was a book about the anatomy of the body. So sometimes, if I have time, it depends how long I have. I can look into someone's eye and I can project a very simple, either a simple drawing or a number or a color. But this is no big deal. I think we all have telepathy, Ross, and I demonstrated it 51 years ago under laboratory controlled conditions. And what the skeptics said and the debunking, that only helped me, Ross. Listen, you're in show business. I bet right now that you get not tens but hundreds of negative emails every week. Every week, someone tries to debunk you. Don't tell me that's not true.
That's
Every,
very true.
very
I
true.
can tell you,
Yeah,
I can tell you, as an investigative journalist that takes this subject seriously, you cop an enormous amount of attack. And,
yeah.
and the thing I find fascinating, Uri, is I do think that the mainstream media has dropped the ball in its coverage. It's allowed itself to be led by the nose because you and I both know, and I'm going to draw you on this, you and I both know that the CIA and other intelligence services are still playing with psychic phenomena. They call it something different. They call it psionic, but it's still happening.
Absolutely, it's happening. This thing about that the CIA stopped psychical research is nonsense. Why would they? This is a cheap method of spying on people, spying on governments. Remote viewing, you just get a bunch of remote viewers into a darkened room with computers in front of them, and they send their mind through space and time, and they bring back information, movements of submarine, nuclear weapons, etc. What happened? It went deep black. That's what happened. Why? Because the CIA, NSA, National Security Agency, they just didn't want the controversy around. They don't need that. So they are still using remote viewers, psychics, not only in America, but MI5, MI6, a few secret services, spying agencies of very major countries are using people like me.
So can I just take you through, Uri? I mean, I think a lot of people watching this, let's be kind to them. They've watched George Clooney in The Men Who Stare at Goats, and they're told that it's all they're told that General Arthur Stubblebine was an idiot, and that the whole CIA Operation Stargate program was based on self-delusion. The scientists were fooling themselves that they could walk through walls and that they could perform psychic abilities. Let's just talk through what you say you can do. What exactly is it that you believe you can do? And can you explain to me how can anyone do it if you believe people can do it?
Okay, Ross, look, I am surprised today. I'm actually amazed how I managed to drive spoon bending into world culture. I mean, it's world culture. Why? Look at the movies like George Clooney, The Matrix, Robert De Niro plays me, he tries to bend the spoon, big rock bands sing about me and spoon bending. It's just massive, still is. Unbelievable spoon bending. And I'll tell you why it caught and why it's still here. Because not everyone can bend a spoon, but a lot of people can. And when this phenomenon happens, it ignites controversy, debate, and amazement. And people want to explore the unknown. People want to taste the paranormal. And let me tell you this, that the skeptics are a tiny minority. They, in my opinion, they're a molecular nothing. All they did to me, to explain your viewers, without the James Randi or without a skeptic, I wouldn't be who I am today. They created the mystery around me. They created the debate, the anger. They created the fire. People, I mean, it was just a frenzy of skepticism against the paranormal, not only against me. So, to answer your question, even my children cannot bend spoons. My grandkids cannot bend spoons. But when I do a show here in my museum, when I do a tour in my museum, I tell that to people. Not everybody can do it, but I saw children here in the museum bending spoons in front of my very own eyes. No trickery involved. A real spoon was bent under my eyes. Look, Ross, the secret of success is originality. I created spoon bending. And when you see Keanu Reeves in The Matrix learning how to bend a spoon from a kid, and the child tells him there is no spoon, it's your mind that bends. That says it all. That one line in The Matrix says it all. So that's why I'm still around. Like you said, I'm 78. I have 3, 4 tours every day in the museum. I get thousands of emails from around the world. And Rob, you promised me you're not taking this out. I was even asked to come out with an Uri Geller alien tarot card. So this is coming out in October. You're leaving this. I'm plugging my tarot
Sure. No,
cards.
you can plug your tarot cards,
Thank
Uri.
you.
That's no problem.
And it's published by Watkins in England. Anyhow, Ross, did I more or less answer your question?
Well, I guess what I'd love to hear from you is what's going on in your mind when you are doing what you purport to be doing, which presumably is some kind of psychokinesis with the spoon bending.
Look, I'm so used to bending spoons that what I do is there's no more in my mind bend, bend. I don't even have to visualize a spoon bend. I do it because I've done it for 60 years. More. What am I? I was 6 years old when it first happened to me here in Israel, not far away, 4 miles away from here. My mother always thought that because we come from Sigmund Freud's family, if you didn't know that, my name is actually Uri Geller Freud. So I come from
Wow.
the great psychologist family, Freud and Einstein. So my mother always thought maybe I inherited some powers from Sigmund Freud, but I don't think so. What is going in my mind is very simple. If I bend the spoon, I just will it to bend. It's kind of, I just do it. But when I was a child in school, I wanted it to happen. I focused. I visualized the spoon bending, and it happened. And today when I walk in the street, I'm actually tired of bending spoons. It's passe for me. It's gone, finished. I don't want to hear about spoon bending. So you know what I did, Ross? You're going to laugh now. But because when I walk in the street, whether it's in Germany or in London or here in Tel Aviv, people, hey, Yuri, can you bend a spoon for us? So look what I did. Something very easy. I have a spoon all the time on me. Watch this. See my arm here, Ross? See?
Yep.
One, two, three. Watch it bend. That's it. That's as far as
So, Uri, I want to take you back to your childhood because I watched a very early interview with you, and I haven't been able to find it in my research. And one of the things that I'm fascinated by is, as you probably know from this show, we talk very openly about UAPs. I strongly believe there is a phenomenon of unidentified anomalous phenomena that is probably non-human, that is engaging with this planet. And this is one of the things I want to talk to you about. I know you were very good friends at SRI and later with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the former Apollo 14 lunar module pilot, who was a very close friend of a very good friend of mine. And Edgar confided in that friend that he really did believe that what you were doing was psychic powers. And he was mortified at the way that you were attacked by the skeptics and the debunkers over the years. But one of the stories that I understand you told him was that as a child, you had some kind of an encounter with a non-human craft that you believe endowed you with the skills you have today.
Okay, let me once and for all answer it the correct way. Because again, the skeptics, as you said, created, Uri Geller got his powers from aliens and so on, trying to kind of rubbish me with such a thought that my powers come from aliens. Okay, let me tell you exactly what happened. I think I was around 6 years old. I was playing in a magical Arabic garden opposite our apartment building. Suddenly, in front of my eyes, I see a sphere of light, and out of that sphere of light, in seconds, a almost like I'll describe it as a laser beam. A laser beam type of a ray emanates out of this sphere of light, hits my forehead, and it's tangible. It's so powerful that I'm pushed into the grass. I have no idea how long I lay there. But when I ran home to tell my mother, she thought I was dreaming or I was making the story up. Okay, this really happened to me, and I adhered to this story. I wrote about it in my books. I talked about it on hundreds, if not thousands, of TV shows. All right, I know it happened to me. Okay, about 15 years ago, one of a BBC documentary was playing in Israel about me, and I was telling this story. The next day, I get an email from a retired Israeli Air Force officer who says to me, Uri, I just saw your documentary. I must tell you this. I saw you in that Arabic garden. I was there. So you can imagine, I jumped on the phone and called him. His name is Abrahami. And I said, "What do you mean you were there?" And this is what he told me. He was walking on Rothschild Boulevard to his parents' apartment. And this garden was on his right. And he described me, little boy, white shirt, curly hair, black. And he described this incredible sphere of light. And he describes me running to my apartment building across the street. And this huge sphere of fire or light explodes on the facade of our apartment building. And the residue, he remembers something black was left on the face of the building. Wow. For me, this was a private validation that after so many decades of me telling this story with no backing up, no witnesses, I was stunned. And of course, I got together with him, I filmed him, and it is true. He saw me, and that's when it totally dawned on me and validated this occurrence of meeting some type of a phenomenon. Now, I do not know, Ross. I do not know if this was an alien encounter. I'm not 100% sure. I have my theories. I'm not sure if it was maybe a spiritual happening. Maybe it was a down to earth phenomenon. I have no idea. But when I met Puharich, when I met Edgar Mitchell, when I was taken to the Lawrence Livermore radiation labs where they build nuclear bombs, when I was taken to the American Naval Surface Weapons Center, and where Dr. Werner von Braun took me to a NASA secret location, and I enter a refrigerated room, everything kind of snapped back into my mind. And I said, yes, probably. This first encounter was alien in nature. That's all I can tell you. You can ask me whatever you wish now.
Okay, I'm really grateful you told me that story and put it and clarified it for us. One thing I wanted to double check with you is before you had that experience as around about a 6-year-old boy, were you manifesting any of the alleged paranormal powers that you subsequently developed? Or was it after that incident that you had those powers?
You're such a great journalist, Ross. You managed to instill the word allegedly. That's okay. I love you anyhow. So listen, um, the spoon bending, I believe, came after that encounter. Maybe 6.5 years old, I'm eating soup. And as I lift the spoon towards my mouth, the spoon starts bending and it broke in, fell into the soup. Then I realized that I have something that other kids don't. And I started developing this power in school. I would hold a broken watch, I'd reactivate it. I could move the hands of a clock on the wall. I would do telepathy. I basically sharpened this phenomenon. I don't even want to call it a gift because I don't really quite know where it comes from. But I believe that maybe that encounter could have, I'm careful, could have triggered this energy in my brain. But then there were other things that happened, like I stuck my finger into my mother's sewing machine and I was electrified. Then, when I was 1 year old, a British soldier shot 2 bullets into our window in Tel Aviv, and the glass fell and broke all over my body. So I had shocks while growing up. I guess I will never really know the truth whether that encounter in that magical Arabic garden was really aliens contacting me. I don't know.
You have spoken. I watched a major documentary that you did with, I think, the Gaia TV, where you spoke about how you feel you have a purpose and you feel very strongly that you've been imbued with a purpose with the gifts that you say that you've got. And what is that purpose? What do you think is your role here on planet Earth?
Yeah, okay. Don't make me a messiah or a prophet or some
No, no,
kind of
no.
a holy
I just
figure.
I don't want it to sound like that, but
Because
I'm intrigued. The reason I say this is because I'm kind of intrigued. I've met a lot of people who've had near death experiences. And I know that as a paratrooper, when you were fighting in the war, you came very close to getting killed. And I wonder, one of my next questions, and you might answer this in this answer, is do you believe that your powers, if if I can say that they are powers, I suppose I do have to use the word allegedly as a journalist to be objective, but do you believe that those powers have been enhanced because of your exposure to near death experiences?
That's a good question. I don't think I can answer that. I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that we all have a purpose. You have a purpose. I have a purpose. Everybody watching us now, you all, men, women, kids, you all have a purpose. You know, outside us in the universe, there is infinity. There's no end, no end to inner space, no end to inner space. In the phone that is filming you now, probably there are billions and billions of entities, and there's no end to outer space. And the last frontier is not outer space. The last frontier is our mind. So we are all here on this planet for a short while to do something positive, hopefully positive. And I don't see myself any different than you are or the people who are watching us now. I'm still a very down to earth person, born in Israel, and yes, became very famous because of something very freaky, something very strange, something that amazed and captivated hundreds of millions of people around the world, and still they're still captivated. So we all have a purpose. I believe that my little purpose was to open the minds of people who already believed in the paranormal. I don't give a F about the skeptics, really. I don't care about them. But I do care about people who are open minded and believers. And we all are believers at the end of the day. You put an atheist in an airplane that is crashing, they will probably shout, "Oh my God!" So it's within us, and I believe that the 60 years of entertainment again, the 60 years of entertainment that I gave around the world did something, and it moved something. Tens of thousands of books were written about the paranormal, and they still write books about the paranormal. I was the motivator. I was a catalyst. I was a trigger to something that is beyond our understanding or beyond our belief system.
The reason I ask this is because there are a lot of people, including people in defense and intelligence in the United States, who privately freely admit to me that they believe there is some kind of consciousness that lies at the heart of a lot of what we describe as the paranormal, and that it's been engaging with humanity for a very, very long time. And if I could describe what they say, they assert that the consciousness is increasingly manifesting itself to humans, that it's making itself more obvious, and that what it's trying to do is twig human consciousness. From what you're saying, you'd seem to agree with that analysis.
Very much so. All this, the analysis really boils down to one very powerful and infinite equation by Albert Einstein. E equals mc square, where what Einstein actually proved to the world that everything is made from energy. You are energy, I'm energy, the people who are watching us are made from energy. We're energetic beings. What that means also, and which Albert Einstein continued to prove scientifically, that energy cannot be destroyed, which brings us into quantum mechanics, quantum entanglement, which you have to ask the question, am I now, Ross, am I creating you or you are creating me? It's mind boggling, it's mind blowing, the world of energy and consciousness. Uh, this is so beyond us. We're a tiny fragment in a sea of endless universe, a little grain of stone with our knowledge. It's beyond us to understand what really consciousness is. But what is happening, I believe, like you probably believe, is that we're being given signals by a higher, let me call it a higher being, if you want to call it God, or you want to call it some type of energy being out there in the universe. It's giving us signs. It's pushing us towards a bigger journey. You know, Carl Jung coined up a word synchronicity. Everything is synchronized in the universe. I'm sitting here talking to you, not because you wanted a show with Uri Geller, an interview, because of synchronicity, which means that everything that happens in the universe happens for a reason. There is a reason for this interview. Maybe we both don't know what it is, but it's triggering something. I think that's in a nutshell, it explains consciousness.
That's a very good explanation of what I was trying to extract from you, Uri. Now, listen, you've already flagged the other major incident in your career that touches on UFOs. And again, Edgar Mitchell has confirmed a large part of this story to my friend privately. During his lifetime, Edgar, the Apollo 14 lunar module pilot astronaut, was unwilling to say publicly that he'd ever had definitive proof of alien life. But privately, he confided in friends, and I've reported this in my book, that he was aware when he had experiences on the moon, he was aware that they were being observed. And he talked to my friend about blue lights that were clearly some kind of structured craft that were following the astronauts during their time in their lunar journey. But he also talked privately to people about something that happened, I believe, at the Goddard Space Center with Werner von Braun, the father of America's space program, the former Nazi, who I understand embraced you as a friend, even though I'm sure as an Israeli Jew, you must have felt very uncomfortable with his background. But it must have been a very interesting meeting. And I'm intrigued if you can tell me, please, the story of what transpired between you and Dr. Werner von Braun.
Okay, first of all, what Edgar Mitchell described you on the moon, that's a tiny thing. Yes, they were followed, but the big thing is, and Edgar says it outright, that a UFO, a craft, crashed on planet Earth. They pulled out bodies of aliens. And that's what Werner von Braun wanted to show me. This is a photograph of Werner von Braun and me. He's taking me into his limo, and we drive off to a huge concrete building. But let me now backtrack. One day, Ed Mitchell calls me up and says to me, Uri, there's a very important doctor who wants to meet with you. I say, fine. He says he's a NASA scientist. I say, fine. Who is he? He says to me, he's Dr. Werner von Braun. I say, what? Dr. Werner von Braun wants to meet me. Dr. Werner von Braun was a Nazi. I've got photographs in the museum here. He's among Gestapo officers. I was shocked when Ed Mitchell told me that, but I couldn't resist. No way. So in the end, with some conflict in my mind, because half of my family were murdered by Nazis, I say to Ed, take me. We get to a NASA base, and by the way, at that time I worked with the CIA, and the CIA gave me a tiny Minox German camera. It's also hanging here on the wall, because I spied for the CIA in Mexico, because I was very close to the president of Mexico, and the CIA gave me some missions to do in Mexico. I take that little camera with me and I give it to my brother-in-law. And I say to Shippy, his name is Shippy, short for Samson. I say to him, Shippy, when we enter Werner von Braun's office, you've got to snap a photo because nobody will believe me. So we enter Werner von Braun's office. Mitchell is with me, Shippy is with me, and there was a CIA man with us too. The first thing that Werner von Braun does, he pulls out of his pocket a tiny little piece of metal, and Shippy snaps. And Werner asks me, to touch the metal and tell him what I feel it is. So I place my finger on the piece of metal and I tell him, Werner, this is not from here. He says, you're right. This is a piece of a UFO. Okay, wow. Then he says to me, come with me. He takes me into his private office, and there is a safe in the office. He opens the safe, and inside there's a bigger piece of metal, about this big, maybe 12 inches. He holds it in his hand, and he says to me, Uri, now place your hand on the piece of metal. Tell me what you feel now. So I place the palm of my hand on the piece of metal, and I immediately tell him, Werner, this is from a UFO. And he says, you're right. Now come with me. He takes me out to the parking lot, and this is the photo. It's an enhanced photo. Somebody made it, more color. And he puts me in a limo, says, sit next to me. I sit next to him. He gives an order to the driver to drive. We drive into the heart of the base. We come to a concrete building. Nothing is written on the building. There's a soldier standing by the door. He opens the door, and Werner says to me, "Follow me." We go down 3 or 4 flights of floor into the abyss of the building.
Is it just you?
No, just me and Werner von Braun. Then in the corridor of that 3rd or 4th floor, there are hooks on the wall, and on the hooks are hanging orange Antarctica coats. You know those warm coats that you wear in Antarctica? They're
Sure.
orange in color, but they all had a NASA logo on. He says, put one on. And he puts one on. I don't know what the hell is going on. And then we turn around the corner. We come to a huge metal door. He opens the door, and I see an enormous refrigerator. It's cold. I walk into this cold space, and listen, Ross, I'm definitely not an idiot, and I definitely was not hypnotized. With my own eyes, I see alien bodies. Some were mangled. They're all in glass tubes. I mean, I'm just mind blown, shocked. I was stunned. I froze, and it suddenly everything dawned on me in that refrigerator room that this is all real. Everything that I believed in, it's all real. What this is this
Can you describe those bodies to me?
very similar to the alien figures that we are used to see, the grays. Look, most of them were mangled. Yeah, most of them were like they looked like they were pulled out forcefully out of a craft, or just I don't know, found strewn around the UFO. But it was mind blowing. Just I mean, that's the
What did Werner tell you about where those beings came
he
from?
didn't. He didn't. We went back to the office. Ed Mitchell was there. Werner gave me a gift. He gave me it's here. I have the camera here. It's a German camera. He said, Uri, you can have this as a gift. I took it because I said I wanted something that belonged to Werner von Braun, and that was the end of the story. So, but it happened.
Did it?
You know,
Did
understand that this is
Yeah.
what I'm astonished at. That this is 50 years ago, Ross. 50 years ago, and the Americans are still sitting on this secret. What's the big
It's
deal?
funny, as we're talking, my friend, just in the last few days, I've interviewed the former UFO investigator for the Pentagon, Luis Elizondo, and he's gone public with me on an interview with NewsNation where he's talked about the fact that the Roswell crash in 1947 was the crash of a UFO, and he described bodies being recovered,
There you go.
alien bodies
And
being recovered from the craft.
yeah, by the way, Ross, let me just grab this piece of paper because there are some names here that I don't know if the name June Crane brings. Did you ever hear of June Crane?
Yes, I do. She was a secretary who allegedly witnessed quite a bit.
Yeah, because
I don't want to lead you.
she was Werner von Braun's secretary, and she held the same piece of metal I held. Then there was, there was Carol Sue Rosin. Carol
I've met
Surosin.
Carol. Yes, I've met
So
Carol,
she was a
and
spokeswoman.
Carol told me the story when I met her in 2021 that Werner warned her that one of the things that was going to be used was the claim that aliens were a threat, and for that reason we needed to militarize our response to the alien threat. And Dr. Werner von Braun allegedly told Carol Rosen that we should be very skeptical of such a claim. Did he ever talk to you about that?
Mitchell talked to me about that. First of all, there's no doubt in my mind that the aliens who are visiting us now, or maybe even are already among us, they are peaceful because if they were hostile, do you remember the movie called Independence Day? I mean,
Sure.
if they were hostile, if they were negative, if they wanted to destroy us, our planet, we would have been destroyed a long time ago. I mean, these craft travel in velocities that we have no idea how they manifest, how they travel through space and time, how they come, how they land here. Their technology is way, way, way beyond us. And their weapons, probably, if they do have weapons, we would have been wiped off the planet a long time ago. If now there are, in my opinion, this is not the only one species or race of aliens that visit us. Maybe there is another one. Maybe there are two or three that visit us. But maybe because they travel through different dimensions, I don't know if I make sense, but maybe one a set of alien species cannot see the other because it's all again going down to quantum entanglement, quantum mechanics, dimensional universe. So we know very little about their technology, but we are trying to weaponize the little technology that we pulled out of the craft that crashed. I'm not sure that it was a Roswell crash. Maybe there were other crash UFOs. There was one in Brazil. There, the stories of crash UFOs, dozens and dozens that are real, bona fide, true crashes. So maybe the American government is still sitting on this top secret, not showing the bodies because they're still trying to build some type of a technological know-how to use for their own military purposes coming from an alien race.
Can I just draw you on why you think Dr. von Braun gave you that insight? I mean, if what you're telling is accurate, Uri, and I've heard indirectly from people who spoke to Edgar Mitchell that he believed your account and that he was present on that day. Why would Dr. Werner von Braun reveal to you what is absolutely, if it's true, the biggest secret in the US government?
Oh, it's the biggest secret on Earth. It's the biggest secret in the universe. I came up with a theory. Okay, he was a Nazi. He was not a direct person that was involved in murdering Jews, but he knew about it. He saw it with his own eyes, and maybe
People definitely died at Peenemünde, where he was testing his missiles. I mean, there was slave labor
okay.
in the missile rocketry place where he was building his rockets. So, no, there's no doubt at all that people died under the control and leadership of Dr. von Braun. And I don't doubt for a moment, by the way, that he achieved great things in the American space program. But um,
So
as um,
let me
as
answer.
has been revealed in Operation Paperclip,
Yeah.
it was a very big scandal that these people were allowed to come to America.
Yes. So let me answer my theory. Let me tell you my theory. Maybe his guilty feelings about what happened in the Third Reich and what Hitler did to the Jews. And when Mitchell told him, "Hey, I know Uri Geller. We've studied Uri Geller. He's been at Stanford. He's been in all these government laboratories." I have a feeling that it was Werner Braun that told Mitchell, "I want to meet Uri Geller because I'm Israeli, because I'm Jewish, because I come from the Holy Land." By the way, um, he was, I don't know if you know this, but he did believe in God. Did you know this?
I didn't know. No.
yeah, we had a conversation about Israel and so on, very short conversation, but because he had these guilty feelings, he wanted to give back something to me. That's I have no other answers. I don't know. Maybe Mitchell convinced him to tell me, to show me. I know one thing for sure: the bodies are still somewhere. Maybe they've been moved from Goddard to other secret places, their locations, but the bodies are there. And one day they're going to be revealed, no doubt. Maybe I'll be dead and gone by then, and they will say, "Oh, Uri Geller, remember Uri Geller? He saw those bodies."
Did Werner von Braun make any admissions to you that they'd recovered solid craft, intact, non-human craft?
Well, he showed me. I have photographs here of the items he's showing me, which he said that they come from a UFO, and they were solid, they were tangible. I touched them. So probably in his office, he had a collection of pieces of, I don't know what it's made out of, whether it's an alloy or something that we've never heard about before, some type of a material that comes from the universe. And yeah, for sure, that craft was crashed. I don't know what happened to the major body of the craft, but it's stored somewhere. Of course, it's stored somewhere.
Can I ask you this? Edgar Mitchell told my friend that the facility where you were taken was at the Goddard Space Center, south of Washington, D.C. Is that where you were?
I can't answer that.
Fair enough. That's fine. Have you, since that experience, ever had any other confirmations of non-human intelligence engaging with this planet?
From whom? From you mean?
Well, I'm going to draw you. There's a very famous Israeli former head of the Israeli space
Oh
program
yeah,
called Haim Eshed. Have you ever met Haim Eshed?
I can't talk about that, but I can tell you one thing. I can tell you this. High Meshed is no fool. He's a highly intelligent man. You know what he did. He was the head of the space security of Israel, and that's big deal. I mean, to be at that position, you got to go through everything. So, what Haim wrote in his book is, in my opinion, is absolutely true, um, and that's as much as I can tell you. There are certain
And
key figures in the American government that know about this, and of course, key figures in Israel know about it. And then there is another Harvard scientist, Loeb. You know about him, right?
I've interviewed Avi Loeb recently, and just for the benefit of our audience that might not know what we're talking about. Haim Eshed, the father of the Israeli space program, gave an extraordinary interview to a Hebrew language newspaper a few years ago, and he's since disappeared from sight. But in that interview, he acknowledged that he had been briefed into the legacy program on non-human intelligence, aliens, by the American government, and that he was aware that there was collaboration between the Israeli government and the American government on issues related to non-human intelligences. And he basically acknowledged that there'd been recovered craft and that there was a secret program. And he actually went into even more detail about an alleged secret space program, which I have to admit, even I'm very skeptical about. But I'd love to know what you've got to say about that, Uri.
I can't really elaborate on this simply because I know too much and I don't want to cross a red line. Uh,
Can I ask you this then? Why do you think there is so much secrecy? Don't we, as human beings, have the right to know what I do believe is the case, which is that the United States, Israel, the UK, probably Canada, probably not my country, Australia, I suspect France, I know Russia and I know China all know that there are non-human intelligences engaging with this planet and that we have recovered some of their technology. Why do you think? Can I invite you to speculate for me? Why is this being suppressed? Why can't we at least know that there are these non human intelligences? I appreciate Just like we can't know about how to make a nuclear bomb, there may be technologies that need to be protected. But why can't the president just be bloody honest with the public and tell them what he knows?
It's not down to the president. It's down to the armed forces in America. We're talking about NSA, National Security Agency. We're talking about the CIA. We're talking about, there are reasons. There are reasons. And most people will tell you, "Oh, we're not ready yet. We're going to be freaking out when we find out that it's all true." But that's not the main reason. There is a major reason here, and it's to do with the major forces, the governments around the world. Ross, do you realize that as we sit here now, there are thousands of nuclear missiles aimed at America, aimed at Russia, aimed at Israel? There are thousands of nuclear bombs moving around the planet in aircrafts right now flying. There are right now, as we speak, there are airplanes that have nuclear bombs on them. There are submarines with nuclear weapons. There are trains moving all around Russia with nuclear bombs or nuclear missiles ready to be fired off. I believe, and this is as much as I will tell you, there is a reason attached. The alien situation, why we're not coming out with it, is attached to the worldwide security. Because if one missile is going to be fired, Ross, that is the end. That's World War III. We're finished. And there is a connection to that.
Can I draw you on that though? Because I would have thought that if nations were more honest with each other about the fact that there are these non-human intelligences zipping around in faster than light craft, or certainly craft that can do things that our technology can't do, I would have thought the best way to deconflict and avoid nuclear war would be to let each other know that these beings exist and that there are these craft that might be inadvertently detected on radar systems and mistaken for for an enemy attack.
Look, Ross, I will end this amazing interview with you for the news. Is that if I was the president of America, or if I was, I don't know, chairman of China, or if I was a Putin in Russia, I would definitely push and drive to release this information. But well, well, there are certain things that I cannot talk about. You people watching me right now, you have to use your imagination. Why this is still a secret? There is a reason for it. Hopefully,
Okay.
someday soon it'll be known. But listen, Ross, it was a pleasure speaking to you.
Can I just can I get one final question? Because I
Sure,
know
of
you'll want to tell
course.
me the story. One final question. You were taken by the CIA to Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, and this is on the nuclear issue. And you were invited to use your mind to see if it was possible to manipulate the trigger mechanism for a nuclear weapon, which to me sounds like an absolutely insane idea. But Yuri, tell me what happened.
It's absolutely not insane idea. I probably there'll be a movie based on that very soon. Um, Listen, I'll tell you something. I'll get back to this, but I'll tell you something even more unbelievable. NSA, which is the National Security Agency, when MI5, MI6 were involved in testing me in London, I managed to dematerialize a tiny little object from point A to point B. Point B was over another room across the wall. They got that information to NSA. NSA figured out that if I can do that, they could probably train a few psychics to erase a Russian city. A Russian city. And this is not science fiction. If you Google this story, it's on my website. My website is urigeller.com. You will freak out that this is absolutely true. They trained people like me to erase cities off the planet. Now, let's go back to the Lawrence Livermore Radiation Labs. I believe that there was an alien encounter there, an alien intervention. When I did certain things, scientists were not freaking out, they were hallucinating. Ross, we're talking about not one person, a few scientists. They were hallucinating. What made them hallucinate? The best description is Annie Jacobson's book, Phenomenon. You got to get that book or check my website, urigeller.com. Uh, Something happened in that laboratory that was beyond me. I, to this
What were
day,
they seeing?
they were seeing, listen, birds. Um, it's incredible. Listen, Ross, you've got to visit my website, all of you, and don't forget my one more plug. If you want to know how to contact aliens, you must get my new tarot pack. By the way, I donate. I don't live from these things. I donate most of it to sick children, so it's a great cause. There's a charity in Israel called Save a Child's Heart, and if
Uri,
yeah,
you've been incredibly kind with your time, and I know
thank you,
you're very, very good with charity. I've seen your work with
thank
young
you.
children. You're a very good man, and thank you so much for sharing your time with us, sir.
Thank you, Ross, and you continue being such a great, um, uh, powerful journalist because you're really brilliant, and I love all the shows that you do.
Thank you. All the best, mate.
Shalom, bye.
Shalom. Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. Now, today we are taking you into the depths of the Cold War, to dark stories of intrigue, espionage, and torture. So let's roll back to 1959. A man whose name will become notorious, Lee Harvey Oswald, enters the Soviet Union and claims to be a defector. Let's roll forward to another year later, and we're in a prison in Cuba called the Isle of Pines. And there, a CIA scientist called David Lamar Christ is being horribly tortured by brutal Cuban and Russian interrogators. And he's revealing all about a secret program he knows all about. Let's also go to Vienna in 1961, and the new president, JFK, is having a conversation with Nikita Khrushchev, the premier of the Soviet Union. Khrushchev complains about things that the CIA are doing that JFK knows nothing about. And let's just call this show a series of unfortunate events, because we now need to roll forward to 1984. And a researcher by the name of Jamie Shandera opens an envelope that's been sent to his home in Los Angeles, and out rolls a roll of film. And when developed, this film shows images of documents that have become notorious. MJ12, Majestic 12. These documents purport to reveal that the Roswell 1947 incident was the crash of an alien spacecraft, and that technology and bodies were recovered, and that the whole thing was covered up by President Truman, and it's been overseen by a committee known as Majestic 12 in the years since. Now, I've long been a skeptic about Majestic 12, and I still am. I think we should be. We should be very, very skeptical about documents that bob up from nowhere. But today, you're going to meet a very interesting person called Jeff Cruikshank. He's a former Australian intelligence official who's worked in an agency so secret, I can't even tell you what it is. But he has had a top secret SCI clearance. He's very briefed into the intrigue inside the Five Eyes Alliance. And today, he's going to tell all about what he's discovered about a very dark period of Cold War history. But first, before I bring Jeff in, I am delighted to announce that we have a sponsor on Reality Check. And that sponsor is none other than a martial arts god that when I was a little boy, I worshipped intensely. I had his posters on my wall, and he inspired me to learn karate and other martial arts as a young teenager. I'm talking about Chuck Norris. When I was a little boy, there was one movie that I went to watch about 5 times in 1972 called The Way of the Dragon. And it was Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris facing off against each other in the Colosseum in Rome. It was just mighty stuff. And would you believe Chuck Norris is now 84 years old? And while I have broken hands and knees and ankles because of my foolish interest in karate, whacking boards in a dojo late into the night, Chuck Norris's body defies explanation. The man is 84 years old, and yet he's still got the vigor of a man 30 or 40 years younger than him. He's still kicking butt and working out. And what's amazing is he's stronger, he can work out longer, and has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this, he tells us, by making one change. And he says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife's even done the same thing as well, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger. Her body looks leaner, and she has energy all day. And Chuck's made a special video that explains everything. And make sure you help us and Chuck by watching it. If you go to chuckdefense.com/Ross and click in the link below in this video, it'll change the way you think about your health. Now, once again, that's chuckdefense.com/Ross. Click on the link in the description below to watch the video. You won't believe how simple it is. Just a reminder, the legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 84 years old, and yet he's got more energy than me. And his body may be broken, but for some reason, he seems to be able to keep on going. I want to know his secret. I'm going to click on that link. What he's discovered that he could effect dramatic changes to his health simply focusing on 3 things that sabotage our body as we age. Watch his method by clicking on the link in the box below, chuckdefense.com/Ross. And now, from martial arts heroes onto Cold War intrigue, let's bring in Jeff Cruikshank. Jeff, welcome to Reality Check. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself within the confines of what you're allowed to reveal as a former Australian intelligence official.
Yeah, good morning, Ross. Pretty hard to beat that introduction. I was involved in automation for defence from 2005. 2009, I joined an agency as a contractor, which I obviously can't talk about. From 2014, I got a special endorsement to certify skiffs for the Australian and American governments, where I designed, built, and certified those facilities to hold information up to the top secret level.
Now, I want to start, Jeff, with JFK, because it's the logical starting point. JFK knew a bit about UFOs, you contend. Tell me why you think JFK knew something about the phenomenon.
Well, he knew quite a bit, Ross, as he entered the Oval Office in 1961. But what he didn't know was the existence of a very, very highly classified program called Palladium that was injecting false UAP signals into the Soviet air defense system, messing with their heads. And the man that was one of the masterminds of that program, as you alluded to, was David Lamar Christ, who was the CIA's real life equivalent of James Bond's Q character. And he was languishing in the prison in Cuba. And I bet Alan Dulles and James Angleton wish they had a real life Chuck Norris to extract him from that prison.
So basically, Lamar Christ told all to his Russian and Cuban interrogators, do we assume?
Well, in his debrief, he was released in 1963 in April in a deal negotiated by James Donovan, who was the head of the OSS. General James Donovan was also a trained lawyer. In his debrief, the CIA found that Dave Christ had actually lied about what he'd told the Cubans, and he was prevented from leaving the country after that. That's
Now,
a CIA document.
so, what are you sourcing that to? Are you sourcing that to documents? Because I'm very skeptical. I want to be upfront with you, Jeff. I'm very skeptical about the so called Majestic 12 documents because I do think some of the later ones, at the very least, are dubious. But it's always been a question in my mind whether the first bundle of documents that were sent to ufologist researcher Jamie Shandera in 1984, it's always been a question in my mind whether the documents that he was sent, which purported to detail the Roswell crash and what Truman did about it, whether they were authentic and as part of a disinformation program. Is it the case that later on the documents that were subsequently released by other parties were an attempt to sow disinformation, to essentially cast aspersions over the authenticity of all of the purported MJ12 documents? So, in terms of the Operation Palladium that you're talking about, Palladium, what are you saying? Are you saying that Operation Palladium is a proven operation that the CIA was running that isn't part of the MJ12 documents?
Yes, that's correct. That was declassified in 2003. Uh, One of the architects, Bud Whelan, spoke about it to the Roadrunners in 2003, and he said in that talk that they were recently declassified.
So let me get this right. What the CIA was doing out of Atsugi in Japan and Peshawar in Pakistan was they were sending up spurious signals through radar that were tricking the Soviet air defense warning over the horizon radar into thinking that what they were seeing were what, UFOs, UAPs?
Just phantom signals. They weren't sure what they were because at the time, this is the period before that ICBMs are actually the prime delivery method for nuclear weapons. So General Curtis LeMay's Strategic Air Command was the primary delivery mechanism for nuclear weapons to Soviet targets.
And so what they were doing was facilitating the ease of passage of the spy planes, the U-2 spy planes that were flying over the Soviet Union, because if the Soviets couldn't distinguish between those spurious signals, those UAPs, if you like, the UFOs, unidentified objects on their radar, they couldn't figure out what was a real spy plane or what was a spurious signal. Is that the point?
That's correct. And they use, in the intelligence world, they use similar words to describe similar things like PSYOP is a psychological operation, but PSYOP with an S, SIOP, is a single integrated operating plan, which is the integration of US Air Force, US Navy to deliver nuclear weapons. It's also called
Now,
PSYOP.
the thing I find incredible, Jeff, is that what you're describing is that General Curtis LeMay, who was the head of the Air Force at the time, he actually had a first strike plan for nuclear attack, didn't he? That what these documents show is Curtis LeMay, the general in charge of the Air Force, was contemplating using these spurious signals, the PSYOP, as a way of launching a first strike on the Soviet Union to take them out.
That's correct. They were using the U-2s to test the tall king radars, which were VHF over the horizon radars, which would then direct the SA-2 anti-aircraft missiles onto uh, either bombers or the U-2 spy planes. So they needed to map where those tall kings were.
Okay, so just explain to me, why does this matter? I mean, what's the relevance of this to the whole UFO anomalous phenomena issue? Who cares? Why is it relevant to this debate?
Because there was evidence that there were actually UFOs and UAPs flying around at the time. The Washington flyover in 1952 was a dedicated, what they call in the military, a show of force by someone. So rather than working with the Soviets to figure out what this force was that had flying within our airspace with impunity, they decided to use psyops to trick the Soviets. And the Soviets did it back as well, I guess.
So, what was it that David Lamar Christ revealed when he was under torture in Cuba? He revealed the existence of Operation Palladium, and that's why Khrushchev knew about it to reveal it to Kennedy in 1961. Is that right?
That's correct. David Lamar Christ was the first scientist ever recruited by CIA in 1950. He was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on the 23rd of December 1952. He went to a facility just called the Plant that was involved in the nuclear energy for propulsion of aircraft, 1957. He got a Q clearance for restricted data for nuclear weapons, and he was supposed to be an audio security expert. I think that was his cover. He had clearances for everything. He had a team of 20 scientists working under him, one of which was James W. McCord in 1955. Now, James
Who was one of the
McCord was
Watergate
also,
burglars.
yep, sure was.
So, why was the CIA's top scientist going to Cuba to presumably do bugging or some kind of espionage operation? Wasn't it incredibly risky if he had this secret in his head about this secret operation called Palladium?
Well, he got briefed the day before he went into Cuba on the 11th of August, 1960, on a secret program that we've got the briefing classification notes for, but the name of the program is redacted. He was apparently going in to plant a bug in a Chinese radio station, but I believe he was possibly installing equipment to inject the palladium signals from the Chinese radio tower within Cuba. And now, someone that you've interviewed before, TD Barnes, has stated in a 2019 interview with Tim McMillan that palladium was in use in Cuba in 1960.
So, what the CIA was doing was grossly improper because the president wasn't even briefed into this operation, and it was potentially risking a confrontation between the Soviet Union and America because the Soviets might have interpreted that spurious data that looked like UAPs to be some kind of American attack. Is that your point?
Yes, that's correct. And the person they thought was going to be the president was Richard Nixon, who ran the 5412 committee. He knew all about palladium. He approved it. Um, the Isle of Pines in the planning in the 18th of August 1960 National Security Council meeting, which was also a 5412 group meeting, they discussed the Isle of Pines as a bridgehead during the Bay of Pigs invasion on the proviso that they had air cover.
So, the origins of the whole Bay of Pigs case, there's an untold story that people don't realize the historical significance of. That not only were there a bunch of emigre Cubans supported by the CIA endeavoring to overthrow the Castro regime, there was also a CIA operation that was in jeopardy because one of their top scientists was being tortured in a Cuban prison and being forced to reveal this secret operation that was essentially a preparation by a nut job in the US Air Force called Curtis LeMay to essentially create a first strike capability against the Soviets.
That's correct. And LeMay had experienced UAPs firsthand in World War II, so he knew all about it. The psychological effects on pilots, his pilots experienced that and started faking engine failures.
Now, you claim that there may be some validity to the MJ12 documents, these controversial Majestic 12 documents, because of things that you've discovered in the National Archives that you believe verify the authenticity of these Majestic 12 documents. Now, I don't want to bog our audience down in too much detail, so let's just go through this very, very carefully. What is it that's in the purported MJ12 documents that you believe goes to this issue of Operation Palladium? What's the story that hasn't been told before?
Because they directly reference palladium. And these documents surfaced 10, 20 years before it was even known about. Jean Petit wrote an article in a classified CIA book called Intelligence Research, Stories of Intelligence Research. And he states that only 6 people knew about palladium in the 1960s in the CIA itself.
And so who knew about it in 1984 when the existence of palladium was asserted in the MJ12 documents that were leaked to Jamie Shandera?
Probably T.D. Barnes, Petit, and a handful of other people.
So your point is that whoever it is that crafted the MJ12 documents, they had knowledge of what was at the time a CIA operation that was so secret, even President John F. Kennedy didn't know about it.
That's correct. Yeah.
So let's keep on working on this, because I understand from what you've told me, Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, was the first to tell JFK about the existence of this operation. He was complaining to JFK at a conference in Vienna in 1961 that this spoofing, this false signals spoofing was going on. Just explain that to me.
Well, that's correct. Khrushchev was a elder statesman, seasoned in diplomatic ways. John F. Kennedy, the young, vibrant American, a little bit naive in diplomatic relations, and Khrushchev's laid this on him from the first instance. MJ12, you guys are fooling with our Soviet air defenses. You better knock it off or we'll get serious.
And so
Kennedy
did Khrushchev
goes away,
refer to MJ12? Did Khrushchev
possibly.
use the nomenclature MJ12?
I believe so, because President Kennedy left that meeting scratching his head, not knowing what Khrushchev was talking about. And then on the 28th of June 1961, he sends a directive to Alan Dulles and says, you need to tell me everything about MJ12 and psychological warfare as they relate to Cold War efforts.
Now, that document that you're citing, that's one of the leaked MJ12 documents, isn't it?
That's correct.
So,
1995, it surfaced.
so it surfaced in 1995, and I'm sure there would be a, what does one call it? A battalion of splenetic debunkers who would say it's just a false document and it doesn't prove anything. Why do you think that that presidential directive to the CIA director, Alan Dulles, is true?
Because in 2022, in the JFK assassination records release, Alan Dulles' event calendar was declassified from December 1959 to January 1962. And the only day in that diary where Alan Dulles meets President Kennedy personally twice in one day is the 28th of June 1961, the same day on that directive.
So there's a document in the MJ12 files, these very disputed MJ12 files, which has that date of the 28th of June 1961, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And that's the date of a meeting between the CIA director, Alan Dulles, and President John F. Kennedy.
Twice.
Now, nobody knew about that meeting until that diary was declassified in 2022.
That's correct. Top secret, compartmented
And yet,
information.
somehow in the 1990s, one of the MJ12 documents surfaced, which referred to that meeting twice on that day between the CIA director and President John F. Kennedy, corroborating what's in that MJ12 memo.
That's correct. Yep.
So lay out the conspiracy for me, Jeff, because you believe, don't you, that what happened now was JFK was shocked that the CIA was essentially running what was a dirty black operation without disclosure to him as the chief executive, the head of the armed forces. He wanted the CIA to rein in its activities, and he instructed Alan Dulles to basically behave himself and give him a full briefing about palladium. Do
Yeah, that's
you
correct.
believe Do you believe that there may, in fact, be a connection between JFK's decision to demand openness from the CIA and openness between the CIA and the Soviets on UAPs? Do you believe there may be a connection between that presidential order and the subsequent murder of John F. Kennedy?
Absolutely. Yep. NASAM 271, which is National Security Action Memorandum 271 on the 12th of November 1963, actually outlines to James Webb, the director of NASA, and to John McCone, the new director of the CIA, that he wants to work with the Soviet Union on outer space matters.
And you believe that's a reference to what we purportedly know from the MJ12 leaked documents, that the president was secretly ordering the CIA to engage more openly with the Soviets about UFOs.
That's correct. He wrote a directive not to John McCone, but to James Jesus Angleton, the director of counterintelligence of the CIA.
And what did he tell Angleton in that alleged MJ12 memo?
He asked Angleton to look at declassifying all the current US UFO information that the CIA had.
Now, Jeff, this, of course, has been raised before. It's been dismissed by the debunkers and I'm sure some CIA historians as wacky conspiracy theories. Why do you think it has validity that there might be a connection between what I'm absolutely sure was a conspiracy to murder JFK? I do not for a moment believe, and this is something that we've done a story about previously with NewsNation, I do not for a moment believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. I think the evidence is overwhelming that there was some kind of a conspiracy involving the CIA, and our audience is welcome to look at the NewsNation episode we did on that, a very deep investigation into the JFK assassination on the 60th anniversary of his murder. But why do you believe that you can scotch the debunkers and assert that you think that those MJ12 documents are authentic?
There's so much that's come out in the JFK assassination records that, and other declassified records. For instance, the IPU report. Number one, there's established fact that there was a department of the counterintelligence corps called the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. That's a fact. That was revealed in 1992 from a FOIA request.
So what's the significance of the nomenclature Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit? Was that also something that's mentioned in the MJ12 documents?
That's a very famous MJ12 document, the IPU report, which is about Roswell. And
so just talk us through that. Talk us through that document, and let's talk about it as if we've got it on screen.
So it's written by the US Army's counterintelligence corps, who were actually prevented from accessing the Roswell crash debris, and in particular the bodies, and it outlines their frustration at not being able to get access to that wreckage. One interesting thing on the cover of that report is what's known as a dissemination limiting marker. And it's been mostly redacted, but there's a few words that bleed out the end. And it's called a magic DLM. And magic with a G was an actual declassified only in 2005, was diplomatic cables from deep within the Japanese government in World War II. And the existence of the magic with a G DLM was spoken about in 1995, but it wasn't published until 2005. The IPU document has one of those DLMs on it, and that document surfaced in 1992. So again, it's revealed classified information that at the time that it surfaced was not known. Um, and the reason they would have used that DLM is because the structure to maintain that information was already in existence for the magic with a G information from Japan. And after August 1945, that information is still classified today. So they've just reused a compartment, changed the G to a J, again for obfuscation, and reused the DLM.
So you believe Magic, MAJIC, Magic 12 or Majestic 12 was a real nomenclature used to conceal what is potentially the biggest secret in the United States?
Yep, that's correct. The CIA used a series of what they call bigrams, two-letter bigrams through their routing system to send information around through all their stations around the world. Uh, MH was Angleton's, the MH chaos system was a notorious one that was revealed in the Church Committee hearings. MK is well known for MK Ultra. Another one would have been MJ.
Isn't the more plausible explanation, Jeff, that the Majestic documents were what some people in the CIA have tried to explain them away as, an effort by the Americans to persuade the Soviets to spend a useless amount of money on investigating things that didn't exist? That's always been the explanation that I have to admit I've bought on the Majestic 12 documents, that Jesus James Angleton, who was the head of counterintelligence for the CIA, was essentially creating these false documents in order to divert the Soviets into a fruitless investigation into UFOs. You don't buy that?
Well, that's what Angleton's job was, to, psychological warfare on the Soviets. But what happened after the Vienna conference was Khrushchev told Kennedy to knock off the Palladium system program. Kennedy knew nothing about it. And again, as Danny Sheehan explained about the raids on Cuba, the CIA were running their own show down there. Kennedy probably realised that after the Bay of Pigs invasion. Um, Khrushchev told him to knock it off. That didn't happen. So Khrushchev upped the ante and said, we'll put missiles in Cuba to get around the early warning system. You'll have 5 minutes warning before a nuclear attack. And that's what precipitated the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Wow. So this is an alternative counter history that I don't think a lot of people in the public are even aware of. You believe not only that the Majestic documents are real, but that there's enough on the historical record that is authenticated by genuine, confirmed archives documents, CIA documents, to show that the CIA was running these black operations without the knowledge of the president, and that the president was essentially ordering the agency to engage more openly with the Soviets about UFOs.
Yeah, that's correct. The Palladium was formalised when Bud Whelan came on board from TRW, which made almost everything for the US military. So that they had no intention of rolling back Palladium, and it just escalated from there. Kennedy had no control over that. Dulles responded in November 1961, the 5th of November, and said basically, and it's that document that actually specifies the Palladium specifics about injecting signals into Soviet air defenses, and those sorts of operations. And right at the end, when Kennedy is asking about MJ12, Dulles says, the details of those operations are properly classified under the 1954 Atomic Energy Act. So the President of the United States does not have a need to know about those operations. Kennedy fired
So
him
that's in
10
the
days later.
MJ12 documents. I find it
Yep.
hilarious that the head of the CIA would ostensibly be telling the President of the United States, the commander of the armed forces, that he has no right to know about something that's properly classified under the Department of Energy laws. I mean, legally, that's bullshit, surely.
That's the way the US law is written. And as you've often said, that US presidents are often considered temporary employees.
So obviously, Kennedy, you believe there's enough on the historical record verified by things like the diary entries that you found. And it was you that found those diary entries, wasn't it, in the National Archives and realized their significance?
That's correct. Yep. Yep.
So just so I'm clear on this, the MJ12 document, whose authenticity has always been disputed, that was leaked to a ufologist in the 1990s. That document referred to two meetings held on the one day between the CIA Director Dulles and President Kennedy on the 28th of June 1961, correct?
Well, those documents weren't actually Jamie Shandera's. These other documents were from walk-ins to researcher Timothy Cooper in 1995. So there's several batches of majestic documents that come under that umbrella.
Yeah. No, I understand, but essentially your point is, how on earth could whoever it was that created those documents and gave them to Timothy Cooper in the 1990s, how could they have known that the CIA director met with President Kennedy twice on the one day on the 28th of June 1961 unless they had inside information that was subsequently only revealed and declassified by the JFK Assassinations Review Board in 2022?
That's correct. And Ryan Wood and Timothy Cooper know who those walk-ins were that supplied those documents. I've got my own suspicions who they were through handwriting analysis. And obviously, one of the people involved was a Russian guy who emigrated into the US in the early 1930s, joined the US military in 1941, joined the US Army Counterintelligence Corps in 1942, and worked in Germany after the war with Henry Kissinger, debriefing Nazi rocket scientists for the paperclip program.
And so you believe that there is a very credible provenance for where those documents could have come from.
That's correct, because this guy, Boris Dmitry Tarasov, left the Army CIC in 1945 and then went to work for the Red Cross in Cleveland, Ohio for 5 years, which I believe is a cover for the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit of the CIC, operating out of Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio. What's interesting about Tarasov is he then joined the CIA in 1957 and worked in Mexico City, where he was a Russian translator, and he was the one that translated the purported person that was supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald as he went to the Soviet embassy and the Cuban consulate to ask for a visa in August and September 1963. So Boris Tarasov was the one that translated Lee Harvey Oswald's conversation in Mexico City.
So this is the fascinating thing is you actually believe that it's utterly implausible that Lee Harvey Oswald was the innocent defector, pro-communist defector that he was portrayed as by the Warren Commission, that the evidence overwhelmingly is that because of his involvement in Operation Palladium, he was a stooge. He was a patsy for the CIA going into the Soviet Union to find out about what their tall king over the horizon radar was capable of.
That's correct. And I'm not the first person by any means to say that. And in fact, it was Francis Gary Powers in 1970 that said Lee Harvey Oswald assisted in the shooting down of my U-2 aircraft. That I found that on the CIA reading room.
So just explain that to me. Do you think there's evidence to support that Oswald was actually allowed to leak the paths of the U-2s to the Soviets to give credibility to himself so that he could find out more from the Soviets on the capabilities of their radar? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yep, absolutely. Oswald was a walk-in in October 31, 1959 to the Soviet embassy, or the American embassy, sorry, in in Moscow and wanted to renounce his US citizenship. So he's a walk into the Soviets. He's got to prove how valuable he is. So, well, as they say in the game, he's prove his bona fides. And as Powers says in his article, there was only two U-2 flights over the Soviet Union after Oswald walked in on Halloween 1959. The first one went off without incident. The second one didn't. That was the one he was shot down in. So to prove his bona fides, he gave information to the Soviets about where they were running U-2 flights from.
But why would the Americans give Lee Harvey Oswald sensitive information about the flights of their U-2 spy planes just to find out about the Soviet radar systems? What was the benefit for the CIA in doing that?
They were old platforms. They had the Oxcart program, which is a precursor to the SR-71 spy plane. They knew they were vulnerable to the SA-2s. They were very, just their design for stealth was sort of old hat, very low wing lift ratios. So, yeah, that was a dangle, as Angleton would call it.
So let me get my head around this, Jeff. I mean, one of the most notorious Cold War episodes was the shooting down by the Soviets of Gary Powers' U-2, something the CIA had actually told the president was impossible. They were very confident that the U-2s, they told the president, could not be shot down by the Soviets. You're actually saying that you think that Gary Powers was a sacrificial lamb. He was knowingly sent to be shot down by the CIA to give credibility to Lee Harvey Oswald's insertion into the Soviet Union as a potential so-called defector.
That's correct. Powers' plane actually had palladium gear on it. It was called a Granger box, and the Soviets displayed that in the Kremlin, all the components that they'd recovered from the U-2 crash. But the problem for Lee Harvey Oswald was that Dave Criss' capture and subsequent torture revealed all that, so it negated his usefulness. The Soviets already knew.
Oh, I get it. So, because I mean, this is one of the things I do find hilarious. There's a great book by Tim Weiner. You've probably read it, called Legacy of Ashes, which tells a very good counter history of the CIA, and it basically describes what the CIA has done since World War II as an endless series of failures. It basically says that the CIA very rarely has had a successful operation because they've screwed up so often. You're suggesting that their stupid decision to send David Lamar Christ into Cuba, where he was captured by the Cubans and interrogated and tortured by the Russian KGB, that compromised their Operation Palladium in the Soviet Union and led to Lee Harvey Oswald's usefulness being compromised.
That's correct. That's why they put him in a radio factory in Minsk, working on a lathe. They already knew. They knew more than the game was up for Harvey Oswald by that time. And not only palladium, Christ knew about the potential Israeli nuclear weapons program as well. And that's why John McCone hurriedly leaked that story to John W. Finney in Seymour Hersh's book, The Samson Option. All their secrets were laid out.
So you've got, that's really interesting, because I didn't know until I read the Samson Option chapter that you referred me to, that the CIA was actually involved in helping the Israelis build a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, James Angleton's church committee testimony, which was only declassified 2 years ago, admits that they were giving assistance to the Israelis through uranium stolen from the nuclear rocket-powered program called NERVA. Was that from the NUMEC facility? And John McCone, was the AEC chairman at that time.
Now, I think at this stage, to be honest, Jeff, our audience's heads are spinning with the complexity of what we're talking about. So I want you to take me to the other bit of evidence that you've got that I just find fascinating. And this is the nuclear tests in the Pacific, where the Americans were testing a type of technology which essentially was designed to incapacitate ICBMs and possibly also satellites by using X-rays. Just explain to me what was going on, what this testing was all about, and talk me through what happened.
Well, McCone replaced Dulles, and obviously the management change was the same management as the old management. So Khrushchev said, "You're not playing the game. We know that you're fooling with our radar." And Jean Petit even mentions about the Cuban Missile Crisis in that classified report that he wrote. So they were fooling around with the radar system still during the atmospheric test program known as Operation Dominic. There was a sub program called Operation Fishbowl, which was nuclear weapons detonations in space or near space, where the effects of the nuclear weapons propagate differently from the atmosphere. And they discovered that high energy X-rays could actually take out incoming ICBM re-entry vehicles by a process called thermomechanical spallation, just from the high energy X-rays. But the design of the weapon was completely different to all the other EMP weapons that they developed. So it was an X-ray weapon, not a gamma ray weapon.
Now, the thing
That
I
they
find
tested.
fascinating about this is it required the use of a large quantity of solid gold in the warhead of the weapon. Just explain that to me.
That's because gold in its outer valence shell only has one electron. So it's a process used in modern day X-ray machines called Bremsstrahlung radiation, where the electron is blasted out of the atom, and when it comes in vicinity of another nucleus of another atom, it actually orbits around the atom, but in doing so releases X-ray energy because you can't destroy or create energy. But yeah, that's what they were testing, and they'd failed 3 times. So they'd blown up an enormous amount of gold from the U.S. Treasury, because that particular was called the bluegill test, which was a specific X-ray test. It had failed 3 times. Kennedy was not happy because the gold was from the U.S. Treasury and it was vaporized. But
And so
and what?
just tell me what happened in the key event that we have videos of. So there are videos of what we're about to talk about. And when you're referring to those videos, can you actually specifically talk to the video so that our editors know what to include in this video?
Yep. So tensions are building up in Cuba. So there's a Atlas 8F missile test in the Cape Canaveral on the 19th of September 1962. It's a dummy test. There's no live warhead on it. They just want to see how accurate the re-entry vehicle is to the target. Once the re-entry vehicle has separated from the main Atlas missile, it starts its re-entry run. There's pyrotechnics and other things. They call them penetration aids to fool radar. So if you try to shoot the warhead, you've got multiple targets to choose from. Once the penetration aids burn up, the RV is filmed by a high-flying KC-135 specialised aircraft run by EG&G of all people.
So the RV, a re-entry vehicle.
Yep, it's re-entering the atmosphere. It's travelling at Mach 18, which is 20,000 feet per second. And an object materializes right alongside it and paces this RV for a minute and a half. So,
now, how do we know this? What's that source to? Is that an authentic document that sources that claim?
That was it's footage that Arrow has actually deemed a UFO incident, and they've put it in the National Archives. Anyone can see it. And I
Now,
found
this is the
the
bit I love.
flight test
Sorry,
report.
Jeff, I've just got to savor this for a moment. So this is a real UFO sighting of some kind of anomalous object that appeared next to the testing of a re-entry vehicle off an ICBM, an American ICBM. And this is traveling at 18 times the speed of sound. And what does this object do around this re-entry vehicle warhead?
It's quite strange because it seems to phase itself into existence and pulse, and then just travels alongside the re-entry vehicle for a minute and a half, and then slowly starts to phase itself out of existence.
So it's
Now,
clearly intelligently controlled.
well, yeah, the Americans are scratching their heads now, thinking, "Are they? Is this a Soviet payback for the palladium? Are they doing something to us now?" So NASA and the US Air Force are unsure. I found the post-flight test report of that missile test, and they said that the object's origin or identification could not be determined. So they don't know. Um,
But the crucial point is, and I just want to re-emphasize this, Arrow, the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, the official UFO investigation office for the Pentagon, the last thing Arrow ever wants to do is acknowledge that a UFO is real and potentially anomalous, potentially perhaps NHI. But in this case, they've acknowledged that this is a real UAP. They haven't been able to explain it prosaically, and they acknowledge officially in one of their reports that this Atlas RV UAP object is real.
that's right. They put that in the category in the National Archives UFO category. So we couldn't do that
Okay,
today,
so
Ross, with our technology, let alone in 1962, basically.
no, well, I mean, there's nothing. We have nothing that can fly at 18 times the speed of sound. And this is in the atmosphere too, isn't it? It's not in orbit.
It's just re-entering the atmosphere. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Now, the
that's September
significance of that
19.
is,
That's in September 1962, in the lead up to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, 24th of October, Strategic Air Command have found the missiles getting moved to Cuba by Khrushchev, the intermediate range ballistic missiles, nuclear tipped. So, Strategic Air Command goes to DEFCON 2. That's the only time in history that they've ever done that. So, they're ready to go in for a preemptive nuclear strike to the Soviet Union. 17 selected targets, LeMay has called the Grand Tour. They're ready to go. So
and
on the
just to make the point here, if anything validates President Kennedy's concern that whether they're spoofed or whether they're real, like they apparently were in the Atlas test, whatever they are, these UAPs are causing a ramping of the tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. It's a vindication for JFK's concerns that if the Soviets and the Americans weren't open with each other about UAPs, this could lead to a tragic confrontation where one side fears that the other side is launching some kind of preemptive attack. That's the significance of that UFO that was seen at the Atlas test, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
But then, Jeff, take me forward to what then happens, because there is another test and another set of videos. What do you find? What have you uncovered?
So on the 25th of October, about 15 minutes to midnight, they launched Bluegill Triple Prime, which is a Thor intermediate range ballistic missile, single stage, launches this special, it's called the XW X1, which is the gold spherical secondary X-ray nuclear weapon. They launch it around, they want to detonate it around midnight to get the maximum effect, because at that point of time in the day, the ionosphere is at its highest point, because it's like a teardrop shape from the Earth in relation to the sun. So this weapon detonates at just a few minutes past midnight on the 26th of October, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there's another two KC-135 aircraft. Its whole tests are fully instrumented, because they've never actually fired one of these weapons before, because it's failed the previous three times. So there's two KC-135s operated by EG&G, because they developed the special high-speed Rapatronic camera that take the footage, because in the I believe it's possibly still the same today. The only way to determine a nuclear weapon yield is to watch its expansion rate in the first few microseconds of the detonation. So these two aircraft have got these high-speed cameras watching the detonation. One has the call sign Kettle 1. The other one has the call sign Kettle 2. So during the blast, Kettle 1, you can see an object, and the fireball is approximately only a few milliseconds after the detonation. The fireball is approximately a kilometre wide. A bright, fiery object tumbles out from within the nuclear fireball, and it's plain as day. You can slow it down and see this very bright object. It must be at least 50 to 100 metres long, tumble out from
And
within the nuclear fireball.
you believe that that is some kind of craft?
Just like the one that was following the Atlas 8F test, but this time it was a real warhead.
So this is speculation, of course, because we just simply don't know what was recovered. But you believe potentially there were non-human intelligences of some kind watching these American tests, keeping a very close observation on what was going on, and that because they were using this technology that was designed to knock out missiles with essentially an X-ray pulse, it also knocked out the UFO.
That's correct. The scientists put that detonation in a point in space and time that there was no other debris or aircraft or anything in the local area, because they wanted to see the weapons effects of this X-ray device. Now, what's interesting
Couldn't it be
is that
debris from
was
the missile?
no, because the missile is hundreds of kilometers away by that point in time. It's launched 170-kilometer apogee. It's released the re-entry vehicle. It's nowhere near it. There's nothing, and nothing that big either.
So what I find really cool about this, Jeff, and you've been involved in helping uncover these videos from the Department of Energy, or at least explaining their significance. There's two videos, as you've explained, Kettle 1 on one aircraft, Kettle 2 on another. One of the videos is censored, isn't it?
That's correct. It's what they call X-ray phenomenology, because in normal atmospheric and sea level, X-rays are absorbed by nitrogen. But bluegill triple prime test was detonated at an altitude of 48 kilometres, so there's a lot less nitrogen at that height. So they use special filters to see the actual weapons effect inside the fireball, and you can clearly see a double pulse on that Kettle 2 footage that goes out and comes back in. It's the first and only time they've ever seen that footage, weapons effect, and that's critical nuclear weapons design information, that footage. And they've covered the exact point with a large white triangle where the object tumbles out from within on the Kettle 1 footage.
So how do you think it came out that one of the videos from the other aircraft was released? Was that an inadvertent disclosure? Was that a mistake?
Uh, there's well-known animosity between Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore Labs. Lawrence Livermore ran one aircraft, Los Alamos ran the other, and there was a third one at what they call the conjugate point, where near Fiji, where it comes back from through the atmosphere, the magnetic field lines, and Sandia Laboratories were operating that KC 135. That was Kettle 3, but it was hundreds of kilometres away. So it was a discrepancy.
I just want to remind our audience that a few months ago we did a story with US Air Force generals who basically talked to us about how their fear at the moment is that the Russians are deploying exactly this kind of weaponry into orbit, and that potentially we could face an absolute catastrophe for not just the GPS systems that we operate, but also for all satellite communications and electrical communications internationally, if in the event of a conflict with the Russians, a weapon like this is used. And the irony is, and I reminded my interviewee about this at the time, the reason the Americans know this is because of this technology that was developed right back in the 1960s during the bluegill test, where they realized the formidable power of these weapons. And not only did they realize that it could knock out, I mean, I think the electricity and lights were knocked out in Hawaii, thousands of miles away, and there was even an effect on communications in New Zealand. This whatever this pulse was, it spread right across the Pacific Ocean, and I think it took the Americans by surprise just how large the effect was of this X-ray pulse weapon.
Yeah, that's correct. And I actually spoke to an eyewitness, a scientist that was working for Los Alamos during all those tests, and he agreed that the reason why the Kettle 1 footage was declassified and Kettle 2 wasn't was simply a personal difference in what should remain classified and what shouldn't. But what's interesting after that was the recovery effort that's documented in the ship's logs of the debris.
Okay, so tell me what happened.
There was 3 ships involved. There was instrumented pods that were deployed via parachute around the blast, like a few kilometres away, to measure X-ray and other technical details. These ships were recovering the pods. And in the deck logs of the USS Safeguard, which was a special salvage, the diver class ship, in the deck logs it says that they've uncovered some spherical debris they'd never seen before. They couldn't identify what it was. It was highly radioactive, so it had something to do with the blast. And when they tried to hook this debris up with their nets, they lost all power to the ship, which is a little unusual because ships usually run with a split switchboard on their generation. So the generators are in parallel, but the switchboards are separately powered. So if you lose one generator, you won't lose total ship power. But they did lose total ship power, and the diver class also had a DC power generation system, which is different to the normal AC system. So that's a bit unusual. But the other thing that was very, very unusual was a ship named the USNS Point Barrow, which was a specialized cargo dock ship that you could sink the aft end and submerge it partially in water and recover objects. Now, that ship was only involved in ionospheric observations. It had no exposure to radiation whatsoever. But the Safeguard documented in its logs that the Point Barrow was involved in a special recovery effort in the days after the bluegill triple prime test. And a government report in 1983.
Can I stop you for a moment there, Jeff?
Sure.
You believe it's very likely that the United States recovered the object that is shown on the film falling, tumbling from the Operation Bluegill X-ray pulse test. Whatever it was that they knocked out of the sky, you believe that ship was involved in the recovery of that object.
That's correct. The Point Barrow logs have mysteriously disappeared. But a lot of the sailors and US air personnel involved in Operation Dominic started getting cancer in the 1980s. Surprise, surprise. So US Department of Energy tasked a company called Carmen Tempo to investigate why there was such a high level of radiation and cancer. And they found the Point Barrow had the second highest levels of all 70 ships involved in Operation Dominic, the second highest level of cancer in the whole fleet. And again, this ship was not involved in any activity officially that exposed it to radiation.
So you believe there's been a cover-up. Basically, they've recovered potentially a non-human craft that was observing the test, and they've kept it quiet by concealing what they know.
That's correct. And the office that oversaw Sandia and Los Alamos was called the Albuquerque Operations Office. That was part of the Atomic Energy Commission's Division of Military Application, which ran the Operation Dominic because of nuclear weapons involved. And the person at the time that was running the Albuquerque operations office was a guy named Lawrence Preston Guys, who just happens to be Jeff Bezos's grandfather, and a scientist that I think you've spoken to, Ross, who was a US presidential advisor to President Kennedy, was Harold Malgrim, and he has publicly stated that Lawrence Guys worked with recovered debris from a UAP down, and I believe that's Bluegill Triple Prime. That's where it went.
So let's summarize what we've got out of all of this, Jeff. You've got a president that was being misled about spoofing being done over the Soviet Union by the CIA that was making the Soviets terrified that they were being attacked by Americans. And essentially, it was in the context of both sides seeing UAPs, craft of some kind, that were never properly explained. And JFK was clearly aware of this concern and raising with the CIA director his demands that there be greater openness between the Soviets and the Americans about UFOs. You believe that's why, in light of all of what you've discovered, the MJ12 documents that show JFK urging the CIA to be more open with the Soviets about UFOs, you believe that might explain why JFK was murdered.
That's correct. There's another document called the Important Memo that states that after the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK had to get an emergency MJ12 briefing. And I believe that's because the CIA lost control of the debris because the US Navy had control of the debris and sent it on its way to Albuquerque Operations Office.
And I think that's very significant because one of my sources who I can name was a former US Navy head of research, Nat Kobitz, who did acknowledge to me that the US Navy was peeved with the US Air Force. You know, he felt that the US Air Force was trying to control the narrative on UFOs and block the Navy and other arms of the armed forces from knowing about what the US Air Force know. There is a lot of inter-service rivalry. So what you're describing there does sound very plausible to me, that there was resentment inside the Navy, that the Air Force was trying to keep what they'd recovered at Roswell very secret.
Yep. And, 27th of October 1962, that's when the second U-2 was shot down over Cuba. And Khrushchev did not authorize that shoot down. So the appearance of a non-human intelligence and a off-world craft in the middle of that crisis possibly helped to defuse the situation when both leaders, Kennedy and Khrushchev, realized that they weren't in control. There was faceless bureaucrats or military leaders in the background actually calling the shots, and possibly made them step back from the brink of nuclear annihilation.
And that's why Khrushchev was so upset that JFK was murdered.
He got rolled in October 1964, I believe, himself by Brezhnev. So, yep.
But as I understand it, when JFK was murdered, I think one of Khrushchev's children has described his incredible sadness that JFK had been killed, because what is consistent with history is that JFK was being incredibly, he was making it an imperative for the Americans to deconflict with the Soviets and to avoid aggressive confrontation. He was much more conciliatory than sections of the military, including nutjobs like General Curtis LeMay, wanted him to be.
Yeah, that's correct. And that the NSA Intercept MJ12 document specifically talks about phantom aircraft in Soviet radar systems. So that again, it's referencing palladium.
Wow. So there's an interesting counterfactual history. Take of it what you want, dear audience. I can tell you, Jeff's somebody with an impeccable pedigree and intelligence, and he's certainly done his analysis. I find the the interesting parallels between what we do know from the official historical record and what we can corroborate from the presidential diaries, it's certainly intriguing. I don't know if I'm prepared to accept, Jeff, that all of the Majestic 12 documents are authentic, because I do suspect that some of them, at least, are disinformation. But you have twigged my curiosity. Is it possible? I mean, what comes out of what you're saying is, was JFK murdered in a conspiracy involving the CIA because he wanted to deconflict with the Soviets at a time when UFOs were a huge issue of concern between both nations? And he was urging the CIA to be more open on space matters.
And it'd be easy to find that out, Ross, if both presidential candidates declassify the rest of the JFK assassination records.
Do you think that's potentially what's being hidden in the JFK records? That essentially,
Absolutely.
to reveal any more of the JFK records might be the slippery slope that reveals this sordid secret that you're talking about?
Absolutely. The fact that, Oswald was involved in the U2, the CIA ran the U2 program from Atsugi. That's where he was based. So, the claim that they didn't know who he was before the assassination doesn't really hold water.
I've never believed Oswald was the simple acting alone innocent. I mean, he clearly was the patsy that he described himself to be. You did not become an operative at Sugi in what was essentially one of the most secret operations being operated by the CIA and the US Air Force unless you were very highly cleared and within the loop. I mean, Oswald was a radar operator. He was clearly well informed about Operation Palladium.
Yep, absolutely. Possibly JD Tippett wasn't supposed to die that day. He was supposed to execute Oswald to keep his mouth shut, and that didn't happen, which then became a problem.
There are so many wheels within wheels. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted you to hear Jeff Cruikshank's analysis, not because necessarily I agree with it. I'm going to reserve judgment and stay agnostic on the MJ12 documents, but I do think there is some very impressive connections that he cited there. Uh, I'll let you be the judge, but I'd certainly be very interested in hearing from anyone who can add to what Jeff Cruikshank's described here. I certainly do think there is an untold history about JFK's efforts to expose what he'd discovered on UFOs. And I do wonder sometimes, Jeff, whether it goes back to JFK's friendship with Forrestal, the then Secretary of the Navy, I think he was, in the 1940s.
Yeah, there's a famous photo of Forrestal surrounded by a gaggle of Allied admirals with a young Jack Kennedy cruising around in the background, cool as a cucumber with his Ray-Bans and suit and tie on.
Do you think it's possible that James Forrestal, when he was in defence, told JFK, the young congressman, or actually, no, this would have been before he became a congressman, told JFK about the Roswell crash?
Well, that's what the IPU report states, that someone within the office of the new Air Force Directorate told JFK, and I believe that might have been Stuart Symington.
And what was his connection to Forrestal?
Well, I think it was the worst kept secret at the time. Roswell crashed, the Roswell Daily Record ran it on their front page on July 8th, and Harry Truman was asked about it on July 10th at a press conference. Sir, have you seen any flying saucers? He tried to diss the story and disregard it completely, but everyone knew.
So the implications of what you're saying, Jeff, are very weighty indeed. I just wonder sometimes whether a lot of people in America are even bothered to investigate their history to try to understand it. Because ever since I first looked at the conspiracy involving JFK's assassination, I've been in no doubt whatsoever that there was a conspiracy to kill the president, and it went far beyond Lee Harvey Oswald. Perhaps you're offering a potential explanation. Jeff Cruikshank, thank you so much for speaking to Reality Check. We'll have you on again another time.
Thanks, Ross.